greater polarization, more frequent gridlock. Most ominously, we see the fears of ordinary people being exploited.
We'll also be bringing in our guest who has been joining us this morning, Carne Ross. He's a former British diplomat. So I guess I want to ask just your overall impressions.
The sort of aesthetic of the whole thing is rather revealing of what's wrong with diplomacy. Who's really affected here? Where are the Syrian people? Where are the Palestinian people? Where are the Libyan people?
Okay, so we're actually going to get in one other quick break.
And music up.
300,000 people made the dangerous journey to Europe this year.
We face completely different circumstances in the 21st century from the 20th century. The rise of these global problems like climate change, economic instability. There's a really deep crisis mounting, I think, of people feeling we're not in control of things. These things are running out of control. It's almost like a despair.
My grandfather was recruited by the Foreign Office to break Nazi codes in Bletchley Park during the Second World War. As a schoolboy, I wanted to be a fighter pilot. Like the Spitfire pilots of the Battle of Britain, we were always the good guys fighting evil. But genetic chance was my enemy. I was colorblind. Age 13, I failed the Royal Air Force eyesight test. I was devastated. I read the newspaper, all of it, every day. Everything from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe. I was fascinated by the world. I was obsessed with war, the Falklands, the Cold War, the game-like logic of nuclear deterrence. If I couldn't be a pilot, I decided I wanted to be a diplomat. The Foreign Office was very much approved of in my family. My father gave me the ultimate incentive. When I told him my ambition, he turned to me and said, "Carne, you have to be very clever to become a diplomat."
This is where I had the security vetting to join the Foreign Office. Where I was interrogated and cross-examined on the details of my personal life, my sexual history, my political leanings, my proclivities for drinking and gambling, the origin of my Eastern European relations, all was discussed in great detail. I threw myself at the Foreign Office. They could have whatever part of me they wanted, gladly. You give us your personal secrets and you belong to us and you become one of us. I started to think of the world through the prism of we rather than I. What would Britain want in this circumstance rather than what I thought was right?
I became a diplomat in 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Empire collapsed. Western democracy and capitalism were victorious. We were the good guys, making the world a better place. It really felt like the dawn of a new era of peace and prosperity.
My first job was up on that top floor up there in Western European Department. Down there, that office there, in the corner, that used to be my office when I was speechwriter for the Foreign Secretary, whose office is in fact up there. Another one of my departments was up here. I was head of the Middle East Peace Process section, as it was then known in better days. And up there is what's called the resident clerkry. I was on one night when the British ambassador in Moscow rang in tears, actually. He was crying, saying that I think 6 of the diplomats at the embassy were being expelled by the Russians for activities outside of their diplomatic status, in other words, espionage. And he was terribly upset about it, and he reported that to the resident clerk, who happened to be me that night.
At the end of 1997, I was posted to the British mission to the United Nations in New York. I was 31. My main responsibility was Iraq and its weapons of mass destruction. This was the diplomatic front line against dictatorship and aggression. As in World War II, Britain was standing against evil. We all believed it. This is where we passed resolutions on Iraq, on weapons inspections, and sanctions on Iraq as a whole, and above all, on the Iraqi people. And, you know, I would be sitting behind my ambassador in one of those chairs where, you know, all the ambassadors would raise their hands to get this resolution through. You know, you can see what this feels like. It's a very rarefied place. The reality of Iraqi people is definitely not here. What sanctions did to the Iraqi people was horrific. We knew they were suffering, and yet it wasn't real suffering to us. It was just paper suffering. We'd be in talks in Washington where people would say, well, you know, I hear those reports too, but I'm sorry, containment's the priority here. It was like literally ordering our needs of security over the needs of ordinary people, and there was considerable suffering. I was a ferocious negotiator. I took pride in being ferocious. I took pride in how quickly I could articulate our arguments and put down any counter-argument. You know, that was my job, and I was extremely effective at it, and I had a reputation for it. And, you know, personally, at a professional level, that was something that was a cause of pride for me. And now I look back on that and think, how on earth did I feel proud of that? I feel much more today. I feel shame. When I've met Iraqis who lived through that, I can hardly look them in the eye. I feel so ashamed. One Iraqi I met after all of this said, so you were part of the genocide of my people. That's not an easy thing to hear. I was pretty upset by that, and there's some truth in it. My apartment looked downtown, so I had an extraordinary view of downtown Manhattan. I could see the Hudson on one side and the East River on the other. It was an amazing view. And my apartment looks directly down towards the World Trade Center. The two towers were in the middle of my view. These photos were taken from my window.
For weeks afterwards, the smoke continued, and there was ash on my windowsill for weeks afterwards. And I'd wake up every morning and see this column of smoke. Yep.
I ushered at the memorial service for the British dead.
All the families were kept queuing on the street outside in the pouring rain because they weren't let in until security were happy and, you know, the VIPs' places had been reserved. Number 10's people, the team who came with the Prime Minister, are vicious little people. They behaved abominably. They were incredibly bossy and nasty to the local staff, who were also very, very traumatized.
After the terrible events of last week, there is shock and disbelief and there is anger. But
Government's failure, our failure, was beyond measure.
The day after the attacks, we negotiated a resolution in the Security Council to condemn the attacks. Never has a resolution at the Security Council been passed so quickly. I was actually sitting in the British seat, so I negotiated this resolution. And there was an enormous upwelling of sympathy for the people who'd suffered. And you just felt the drums of war beating. You just felt this momentum, this train had started, and there was no way anybody was going to stop it.
Good afternoon. On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
Three months after the American and British conquest of Afghanistan, I was sent to the British Embassy in Kabul. We were flown about in a C-130 Hercules. I loved it. We had bodyguards who themselves had an escort of Royal Marines because it was so dangerous.
This guy was called Khalili. He's a leader of the Hazara in Afghanistan. Me with my little notebook. Well, Mr. Khalili, I'm here to relay to you what the British government feels about Afghanistan. Grateful if you could tell me what you think. I think that's me. Yeah, it is me. So it's the perfect romantic image of the diplomat, isn't it? Sitting with the Afghan tribesmen discussing the political future. They're like, don't claim to me you're going to be here in perpetuity helping us build democracy. We know exactly what that means. You know, the naivety with which we went in there, you know, the proclamations we made, I made myself, that Britain was going to stick with Afghanistan until we built democracy and all of that. And what is it, 13 years later, heavy fighting still going on from this that was literally blue tacked next to my pillow. Such did I love this picture when I was a schoolboy. It's a romantic image of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, 1981, and the Soviet invasion, to this, the British invasion, 2002, in Afghanistan. So it was childhood dream fulfillment, wasn't it? That's what it is. Now shattered.
When I got home to New York, I was deeply troubled by everything I'd been through. I got married, which was wonderful, but I no longer believed in my work, in the cause I had signed up to. I had to stop. I felt that the system I'd battled for and believed in wasn't working. Capitalism, democracy, the Western model, whatever you called it. The dream of 1989 was broken. So I took a year off. I spent my days in the New York University Library. I just read and read, often randomly picking books off the shelves around my desk. I was trying to rediscover my purpose. I was looking for political ideals that I could believe in. I was groping my way towards a better way of doing things. Meanwhile, just 30 or so blocks north at the United Nations in my former workplace, my government was preparing for war. The Iraq War and what my government said about it would change my life.
Saddam Hussein's intentions have never changed. He is not developing the missiles for self-defense. These are missiles that Iraq wants in order to project power, to threaten, and to deliver chemical, biological, and, if we let him, nuclear warheads.
tonight, British servicemen and women are engaged from air, land and sea. Their mission? To remove Saddam Hussein from power and disarm Iraq of its weapons of mass destruction.
But But I knew that my government's real assessment of Iraq's alleged threat was very different from what our leaders were claiming in public. Although I was on sabbatical, I was in close touch with friends at the UN Security Council and the weapons inspection body which I had helped set up. And as the war played out, I came to this cafe to meet one of Britain's chief weapons inspectors, my colleague, Dr. David Kelly. David Kelly had just given a talk at the New School where I was a fellow, and afterwards we had lunch here. We were talking about the claims that the government made before the invasion that Iraq posed a threat. You know, we were just, I guess, quizzical. I didn't really understand it, and nor did he. When David returned to London, he briefed a journalist off the record that the government had exaggerated the capabilities of Saddam Hussein's WMD. He became the centre of a terrible and bitter political row about the lies the British government had told to justify the invasion of Iraq.
Dr. Kelly is a scientist with long experience of Iraq's weapons programs. He came forward earlier this month and told his bosses he'd had an unauthorised meeting in a London hotel with BBC journalist Andrew Gilligan. David was revealed as the source of this story, and he was basically hounded by the government. The MOD, his employer, basically hung him out to dry, and eventually he testified in Parliament.
My conversation with him was primarily about Iraq, about his experiences in Iraq, and the consequences of the war, which was the failure to use weapons of mass destruction during the war, and the failure by May the 22nd to find such weapons. That was the
This quiet, decent man was kicked around like a political football.
Why did you feel it was incumbent upon you to go along with the requests that clearly have been made to you to be thrown to the wolves, not only to the media but also to this committee?
I think that's a line of question you have to ask the Ministry of Defence. Sorry.
I reckon you're chaff. You've been thrown up to divert our probing. You ever felt like a fall guy? I mean, you've been set up, haven't you?
That's not a question I can answer.
But you feel that?
No, I accept the process that's going on. I'm sorry, I accept the process that's happening.
I imagine he found the public attention unbearable. I wrote to him, you know, expressing my solidarity with him, but he didn't reply.
Police are expected to confirm later today that a body found in Oxfordshire woodland is that of the Ministry of Defence weapons expert David Kelly.
Dr. Kelly's wife has told a friend that he'd become extremely stressed at being caught in the middle of the row between the BBC and the government over its use of intelligence. This inquiry will look at the circumstances surrounding Dr. Kelly's death. It's expected to look at his questioning earlier this week by the Commons Foreign
This is an absolutely terrible tragedy. I'm profoundly saddened for David Kelly and for his family. He was a fine public servant.
David's suicide shocked me to the quick. The last time I was here was David's funeral. I came with several of my colleagues from the Foreign Office and the Ministry of Defence. We were all devastated. And I remember one of them just wept copiously throughout the service. But it was completely overwhelmed by the blaring media circus that David's death had become. And that was, of course, a breach, a moment of rupture, after which there was no going back. My trust in government, my political leaders, to an extent, I'm afraid to say my colleagues too, was destroyed once and for all. No one really knows, but an estimated 500,000 Iraqis have died as a result of this unnecessary war. I resigned from the Foreign Office after sending evidence in secret to the first official inquiry into the war. I wanted to make my evidence public at the time, but I was warned that if I did, I'd be prosecuted under the Official Secrets Act. And to be honest, I was also scared of being hounded like David. Eventually, an MP friend demanded my evidence in Parliament, and if Parliament asked for it, I couldn't be prosecuted.
Well, today evidence will be published that says the government did not really believe that British diplomats.
In his submission to it, Mr. Ross said, "At no time did Her Majesty's government assess that Iraq's WMD posed a threat to the
The more we learn about the beginning of the war, the more uncertain the rationale for it seems to be.
There was a new inquiry. I was asked to testify again.
Before offering my testimony, I would like to pay tribute to a man who should have been here to give his account. His testimony would have been authoritative, rigorous, and honest, for these were his qualities. At the UK mission in New York, we relied considerably on David Kelly as one of the few experts able to interpret and convey, with the scientist's discipline and objectivity, the complex and uncertain picture of Iraq's WMD. I hope that this inquiry will do all it can to restore the values which David's work exemplified. I wanted to read that out at the beginning of my testimony. Before I went into the room to sit in front of Chilcot and the others, I was taken to a side room, and the senior Ministry of Defence official in charge of the Secretariat for the inquiry very aggressively said to me that if I read out that statement, the TV cameras would be turned off.
Mr. Ross, you were a first secretary in the UK mission at the United Nations in New York from late 97 to June 2002, I think.
Yes.
And we'll be asking Mr. Ross for evidence based on his recollections and insights into the deliberations and actions at the United Nations on Iraq, which are relevant to our terms of reference, where Mr. Ross's role gave him first-hand knowledge on which to draw in giving evidence to this inquiry. It was realistic, or wasn't it, that Iraq could soon have posed a threat to a WMD-based threat?
I found this claim absolutely extraordinary. I mean, we never believed that in the time I worked on it. We never argued it to allies or others. And nobody ever believed that these things actually existed. We thought there might be one or two dismantled devices left in some kind of warehouse somewhere, but there was no hard evidence of scuds being wheeled around in the desert waiting to be fired. If there had been, we would have seen them. And the third part of the threat is the intention. And there was no evidence of that either.
They had deliberately misled the public by claiming that Iraq was a threat when it wasn't, and that there were no alternatives to war when there were. To lie to the public and to the servicemen and women you're sending to war is the gravest of disservices. Government is established to provide security for the people, and to lie about war, to make false decisions about war, that's the worst thing any government can possibly do.
The fact that that deliberation, that consideration of alternatives did not take place is to me a disgrace, and it should be remarked upon.
When I resigned, I was working in Kosovo on secondment to the United Nations. I had to leave the UN. I was unemployed, broke, with no idea what to do next. I'd only ever worked in diplomacy. I thought I'd spend my whole life as a diplomat. It was all I knew how to do. My wife suggested I advise the Kosovo government. I flew back to Kosovo and offered the Prime Minister my services. I became Kosovo's diplomatic advisor. When I was at the UN, you could pretty much guarantee that the people most affected were never in the room. I set up an NGO to try to fix this, to make diplomacy fairer.
We advised South Sudan before their independence, Western Sahara. What we try to do is advise our clients on how to maneuver diplomatically. Syria coalition, desperately difficult issue, of course. They are an external opposition movement fighting the Assad regime. Somaliland, where the overwhelming majority of the population want to be an independent country. Independent Diplomat, it's a diplomatic advisory group. It's a group of former diplomats and international lawyers who advise democratic governments, countries and political movements around the world on diplomatic strategy. Both the work of Independent Diplomat and my own personal philosophy is driven by the belief that people should be part of the decisions that affect them.
Around this time, I was sitting awake at 3 in the morning with my young daughter, watching television. By chance, I heard about complexity theory. It changed the way I saw the world. I grew up believing that government and neoclassical economics is like a kind of machine. These systems are complicated, but once you've worked out how all the cogs turn and which way the levers go, it's a matter of cause and effect, input and output. But in fact, the world is not complicated, knowable, it's complex. Billions of actors in constant motion, acting and reacting to each other and reacting back again. A highly connected, constantly fluid state between order and chaos. Top-down authority doesn't work in a complex system because the state of the system is fundamentally unknowable. We can never be sure what the consequence of any one action will be. I experienced this for myself working in government, and I'm not the only one.
Modernity and the movement of money and the movement of ideas means that power is sucked out of local communities and ends up being located almost nowhere. We run around thinking maybe the power's in Parliament, or maybe the power's with the bankers, or maybe the power's with the journalists. Politicians don't really, in many ways, have the kind of power that people imagine. In fact, most of the life of a politician is desperately trying to eke anything out. There isn't really any power here. You get here and it's like the Wizard of Oz.
But somebody has power, don't they? I mean, somebody has the power to make the great decisions of state, taxation, or whether to wage a war or not. I mean, these are real powers.
You're completely right. Theoretically, a Secretary of State can wake up in the morning and make a huge decision. But if you look at Britain, the reality is it's unbelievably difficult in practice to do almost anything.
To wage a war? Is it so difficult to wage a war? I mean, it doesn't seem to have been too difficult in the last few years.
Oddly, waging a war is, ironically, one of the things that is easier to do because it's about other people's countries.
Complexity theory tells us that when a system reaches a critical state, only one tiny event can make the whole thing shift. When Mohamed Bouaziz set himself on fire in Tunisia, he tipped the whole region into a state of revolution and turmoil. The Arab Spring. The consequences are still playing out today. We think we need to be big to be powerful, but in fact, we can be small. In the US and the West, anger has been building for a long time as a tiny few grow immensely rich while everyone else gets poorer. In 2011, a small protest led to an extraordinary spontaneous mass movement that spread to 1,000 towns and cities worldwide. It began just a few blocks from my own home.
This is the home of Occupy Wall Street. This is where the movement began, where people began staying in this park, having meetings about the concerns of Occupy Wall Street. Funnily enough, they had mass meetings called General Assemblies, which is a bit like, not exactly like the meeting of the General Assembly in the UN, rather the opposite, because these were mass meetings that anybody could participate in.
Our process! Our process!
Occupy's great achievement was to make inequality a political issue. Some meetings I attended were chaotic, frustrating, even boring. But Occupy spawned groups and networks that turned anger into action.
Everybody has the potential for leadership, and that people are naturally collaborative.
Yeah.
And that given the opportunity, people want to work together in community to solve mutual problems, because I think inherently we understand that we have power together, rather than that sort of like what's taught to us, which is this dog-eat-dog notion of competition. We need to be able to unlock our imagination and to be able to even dream out of that paradigm.
And how do you dream?
And how do I dream? I dream by helping people take over the streets.
Then in October 2012, Hurricane Sandy hit New York City.
Over 4 million people have entered their 4th day without power across 12 states following the devastating superstorm Sandy. Concern is growing for people who lack food, water, and heat.
The hallways are dark, the building is dark, the whole project is dark. It's like a war zone out here.
The morning of the storm, a couple of us started activating these networks that had been sort of grown up around the Occupy movement and solidified around Occupy Wall Street.
We were able to use those networks to say, actually, this is an incredibly effective way to organize, much more effective than the Red Cross and FEMA and other institutions that are set up to do relief. I was driving back soon after Sandy with a volunteer who had not been a part of the Occupy Wall Street network. And as we were driving back, she said, you know, I always thought that government was going to be there to protect me. And what I'm learning is that it's not, that that's a lie that I've been told. And I think these moments, like Sandy, are moments where we expand the perception of what's really going on. These crises are only getting worse and worse. There's these waves that are intensifying, and the crises themselves are going to keep creating these cracks where more and more people come in.
So in the most demanding crisis, ground-up networks work better than top-down government. This was what I was looking for. A politics where the people with most at stake were in control. Self-organization, no hierarchy. This is a political philosophy with a long history, a philosophy that most regard as radical and totally impractical. Anarchism.
Anarchism has a pretty broad sweep, but the basic conception is that humans have a fundamental need and right for free, creative work and life under their own control, meaning any kind of hierarchy, domination, master-servant relation, boss-employee relation, any such relation is going to have to justify itself. But if you can't, it ought to be dismantled and replaced by a more free, cooperative, participatory society.
Don't you have an overly optimistic view of human nature?
Well, the other view also does. It relies on the optimistic view that if we have leadership, it'll be benign. The evidence of history is overwhelmingly against that. So, yes, we're not angels, but is the solution to that to create structures and institutions which bring out the worst in us?
Is it helpful to think of anarchism as a process, a set of principles that guide action, means not ends, principles like equality, inclusion, respect, freedom?
Exactly as you said, you can't really make a means-end distinction. The means you choose are designed for the ends you have in mind. If we find ways to liberate ourselves from cultural, political, economic, and other forms of oppression, we'll discover aspects of our nature which we weren't aware that we possessed.
What does an ideal anarchist society look like?
Probably the peak of modern anarchism was Spain in the 1930s.
I first learned about the anarchist revolution in Spain from a book I love by the English writer George Orwell.
The anarchists were still in virtual control of Catalonia, and the revolution was still in full swing. But when one came straight from England, Barcelona was something startling and overwhelming.
It was when anarchism was actually happening. Anarchism was actually put into practice as a political philosophy, and this is virtually the only time that it happened in recent years.
But Spain was in the midst of a terrible civil war. Orwell had gone to join the Republicans fighting General Franco's fascists. But he realized that in Catalonia, an extraordinary anarchist revolution was underway.
Barcelona vivió en los días de julio del 36 3 días de huelga general, y cuando los trabajadores volvieron a las fábricas, a las empresas, a trabajar, se encontraron que muchos empresarios habían huido y tenían que volver a poner en marcha la producción. Entonces, asumieron el control de las empresas, de manera espontánea. Luego se reguló. Luego, en Cataluña se creó un decreto, el decreto de colectivizaciones y control obrero, que se aprobó por parte de la Generalitat.
It was the first time that I'd ever been in a town when the working class was in the saddle. Waiters and shop walkers looked you in the face and treated you as an equal. Above all, there was a belief in the revolution and the future. A feeling of having suddenly emerged into an era of equality and freedom. Human beings were trying to behave as human beings, and not as cogs in the capitalist machine. There was much in it that I didn't understand. In some ways, I didn't even like it, but I recognized it immediately as a state of affairs worth fighting for.
It was a remarkable and unprecedented attempt to create a better and equal society, without a state, without religion, without capitalism, where the people managed their own affairs. Workers ran their own factories, peasants took over the land, women fought alongside men. But in 1937, Stalin, the Republic's main backer, decided that he could not allow a genuine people's revolution to succeed.
La revolución, tal y como se estaba produciendo en Cataluña, era la antítesis de lo que estaba sucediendo en la Unión Soviética. De aquí que Stalin tuvo un enorme interés en hacer fracasar la revolución.
This is where the communists attacked the anarchists. The anarchist revolution was brought to an end, and it happened right here at the telephone exchange.
Orwell witnessed the tragic end of the anarchist revolution on the streets of Barcelona. Stalin's intervention undermined the Republicans and helped them lose the civil war. The fascists won. It was a tragic moment. Orwell had enlisted in a communist militia to fight the fascists, but having witnessed the revolution firsthand, he said that if he came back, he would have come back as an anarchist.
It happened. Anarchism took place here. It was real, and it was, to Orwell at least, very attractive. Something very appealing about it, something beautiful. And it made real these ideas that have been around for a long time and that have been also hopping around in my head recently.
that it's not just a theory, it's actually a practice, and when put into practice, it can be extraordinary. Although fascist rule ended in 1975, today's Spain still suffers widespread economic deprivation, high unemployment, and inequality. But in a village in southern Spain, the people took matters into their own hands. Anarchist ideals live on. It's a very interesting painting because it shows the march of the villagers of Marinaleda towards El Humoso, which is a farm that was owned by the local aristocrat, disused, and the villagers occupied the farm. You led the original occupation of this land?
Sí. Yo dirigí esa lucha. Teníamos que la mayoría de la población estaba en paro, jornaleros sin tierra y sin trabajo. La gente tenía trampas en las tiendas, no recibía otra cosa que una cosa que llamaba el empleo comunitario, que era una ayuda, una limosna que daba el gobierno para mantener el orden público. Hicimos marchas andando desde Marinaleda hasta aquí, entonces veníamos atravesando porque por la carretera nos paraba la Guardia Civil, entonces veníamos campo a través hasta llegar a esta finca donde nos desalojaba la Guardia Civil y volvíamos al día siguiente. Nos desalojaba la Guardia Civil, volvíamos al día siguiente. El gobierno nos cedió las tierras después de eso. Nosotros no queremos la propiedad de la tierra, sino el uso de la tierra. Nosotros pensamos que la tierra no es de nadie, debe ser de la comunidad que la habita y la trabaja. La tierra, la alacena que alimenta el planeta, y no debe ser un botín para el negocio de unos cuantos.
In austerity hit Spain, millions have lost their homes, leading some to commit suicide. But in Marinaleda, the villagers are building houses for each other. And how does that work?
People have two options, okay? If they have their jobs and they cannot work here, they have to pay monthly an amount of money.
Right.
And the second option is working here and you don't have to pay anything.
I see.
Because you are giving your job here.
Right.
You are building your own house.
And people in the village participate in building the houses, but they don't know which one they're going to live in.
Yes.
So they devote equal effort to
Because
whichever house they're building.
They build all the houses.
Yeah.
All the houses are the same.
Yeah.
And then after they build,
Yeah.
there is a raffle,
Yeah.
and they choose
Okay.
one of them.
If you win the raffle, you get the best house.
I
Yeah.
hope.
Yeah.
I hope so.
So you're hoping that you're going to live in one of these?
Yes.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
I think this system should be in everywhere.
Yeah. But people like me can't build anything. You know, I'm useless with my hands. You know, if I built one of these houses, it would be a disaster.
No, because you can make what you put between the bricks.
Oh, the cement. I could make the cement.
Cement. You can do that.
Yes.
So you are participating. You are
Yes.
working for your own
Yeah.
house. So
Yeah, I could mix the cement. I could probably manage that.
Hoy a las 6 reunión de regadores en el sindicato. Hoy a las 6 reunión de regadores en el sindicato. Sí, trete.
Después que van del 1 al 5 van a ser los que van primero, luego ya pues irán llamando correlativamente.
Dime de siempre un número. Ahora te ponen Tenente. Ahora decir los números. Sí, venga.
In Spain, 50% of young people are unemployed. But in Marinaleda, work is organised to maximise employment, making sure everyone has work. Shifts are shared by a weekly lottery.
Está puesto al revés.
What is the best thing about being part of the cooperative?
Hombre, lo mejor, en primer lugar, el saber que con la lucha se ha conseguido una forma de trabajar tú la tierra para ti y para tu gente. Eso es lo mejor. Luego los otros son todos mejoras de decir, no tengo que estar pendiente de que me avisen para trabajar, no tengo que estar pendiente de un señorito, no. Pero principalmente lo más importante de todo esto es que esta tierra se ha conseguido con lucha y que el pueblo tiene trabajo aquí.
En la medida que se cambia la realidad en un sitio concreto, se está cambiando en el planeta.
Sí.
Por tanto, yo creo que un hecho revolucionario en un sitio concreto es un hecho revolucionario en todo el planeta.
Sí.
Que aún dentro del propio capitalismo es posible liberar territorios concretos, espacios concretos, que digan desde la práctica que es posible otro mundo. Aún en este territorio donde no germina la utopía. Pero yo creo que si somos constantes, terminará germinando y triunfando.
Ajá.
I got back from Spain and went to the office.
Who was the main party on the negotiation? Was it?
I actually don't know who initiated it.
Right.
Who initiated the PRS?
So did Mr.
De Mistura
came to the council and said he wanted it?
Yeah, he came to the council,
okay.
And so you know the council traditionally, when the envoy comes in, they've got something new to do. If they can manage it, they'll churn something out that that backs them up.
I really believe in what we're doing here. I spend my life trying to pull the levers in places like the UN Security Council. When I mention anarchism to the diplomats I deal with, I always get a chuckle.
So it was negotiated the previous week, but it wasn't adopted. And then over the weekend, there was the marketplace killing in Duoma, the Syrian regime bombing the marketplace there, killing 100 people in one go, 111 people plus in one go.
I have this odd political double life. By day, I work in a deeply imperfect state-based system. By night, dreaming of an anarchist revolution. I realise that no government will legislate for the necessary change. People will have to do it for themselves. And they are, even in this most capitalist of cities, New York. In Brooklyn, the founders of this store decided to turn it into a cooperative, where everyone who works there owns the business.
Initially, when we were brainstorming the business, we thought the idea of a co-op would be really good. We've always relied on our employees. I mean, they brought as much to the table as we have in a lot of ways. And it just kind of, felt right to kind of share the wealth of the store.
Have a great day.
When they told you they wanted you to join the co-op, how did that make you feel about your work here?
It meant so much to me because they don't have to do that. Like, regular jobs don't do that. And just for them to sit there and want to see us grow as individuals, for us to own something and them willing to share their baby, because this store's like their baby to them. So for them to open their arms and let us in, I'm just honored.
Do you think it could be more widespread?
I think it can be widespread. I think if people get the proper education about co-ops and, just as far as that, it can be something that a lot of other businesses can do.
I do believe that with a will and a bit of energy, change is actually possible. Changing a few people's lives, if we all did that, that would amount to global change.
Have a great day.
But it will be hard to build a fairer economy as long as the political system favours the interests of those already privileged. How do you change that? In Williamsburg, the local people are meeting to make their own spending decisions for their own neighborhood.
It's very important to work together and know each other. And you want to be able to work together to make sure that you're solving the community's problem, right? That this is about doing as much as you can for the entire community. A lot of people think that elected officials are like the kings of the people, but I'm more a soldier of the people, right? So they make the decisions and I have to go follow through and make sure that I use their collective power to get things done.
When everyone takes part in decisions, everyone's interests are acknowledged. Government by the citizens themselves.
And the great thing is that it's your money. Es su dinero. I have no decision-making power in any of this. So you guys decide what you do with $1 million.
But processes like this have to be scaled up to work. People have to believe it really matters before they'll make the effort to turn up and spend the time to listen to one another.
This is a district of 155,000 people, something like that. So I imagine the city spends hundreds of millions of dollars, schools, hospitals, roads, all the rest of it in this district. Wouldn't it be better if these meetings could decide hundreds of millions of dollars?
Yes, I think so. I think that what New York City is trying to do is really get to a point where we're like testing it out. It's almost like a pilot thing. I think this is contagious, what's happening right now. And the city council is really taking it on.
I spend a lot of my time asking rich people for money to do our work. I met the most extraordinary brave woman from the occupied Western Sahara, which is illegally occupied by Morocco, who's a human rights defender, has been tortured, solitary confinement, separated from her children for decades. A wonderful, brave woman who I've met many times over the years. She's an absolute inspiration. And whenever I see her, I feel really good and I feel really kind of, my tank fills up. And fairly recently this was, I went back to my desk and I was about to send an email to Richard Branson's foundation to ask for money for one of our projects. And in my inbox was an email telling me that Branson's Virgin organization had just organized a kite surfing festival in the occupied Western Sahara. And it just came home to me that we are dependent on the very people who are the status quo to change that status quo. It doesn't make sense. There is something wrong with this model. And I'm really, really struggling with that right now. Then I began to read about an extraordinary story about anarchism in action thousands of miles away. And it all begins here. This is the Turkish island of İmralı. There's nothing on this island except a prison. And for 20 years there was only one prisoner here, serving a life sentence for treason. Abdullah Öcalan founded the PKK, a militant organization that fought Turkey to protect the political rights of the Kurds. While he was in solitary confinement, Öcalan read a book that changed everything for him. The Ecology of Freedom by Murray Bookchin. Bookchin was a political thinker who lived in the Lower East Side of New York, where I live today. He himself had been inspired by the Spanish anarchist revolution in the 1930s.
Spanish anarchism created a political culture that spoke to the deepest feelings of the culture of the people themselves. It was not a party, it was not only a movement, it was above all a whole education, a whole way of life, a way to live. In this sense, it was a truly people's movement. It was not invented in the British Museum like socialism.
He explored, he went back to first principles. What is it that works? How do people really interact face to face? How do people live richly? And from that, he developed
you know, what became communalism, but a theory of anarchism, basically, of a democratic anarchism of people interacting, making decisions face to face. And he also blended that with ecology.
The thing that we have to recognize, in my opinion, is that there are in the world today millions of people who, under different names, are really anarchists. Deep in the culture of the people is the desire to regain their power, to create their own institutions, to create their own lifeways, to take control of their lives.
When Abdullah Öcalan read Bookchin, he decided this was the answer. He adapted Bookchin's ideas for the Kurdish struggle. This was self-government without a state for a people without a state. And he persuaded his followers to adopt the philosophy. And these ideas are coming to life in a country at war, Syria.
So this is a map of Syria, and where I'm going to go is into Rojava, which is basically this area here, under Kurdish control. And they control a band of territory, sort of going along like this all the way to about here. But I'll be floating around here, visiting the various kind of towns. ISIS are up here. They come across here, basically, in a line up here, more or less, including Mosul. So I'll be keeping in this bit.
It's dangerous, a bit dicey. I'm more than a little bit nervous. But it sounds like everything I've been thinking about is happening here. Anarchism in practice. I want to go and see it for myself.
Yeah, I didn't know I was going to have to take body armor and a bloody helmet. I didn't know that.
How are you? Hi. How are you?
I had to get to Syria by flying to Iraq, then going overland to the border. I tried to come here several times when I worked on Iraq at the UN, but the Saddam regime wouldn't let me. It's extraordinary finally to be here, this place that has populated my imagination for so long.
This road is noisy and crowded, as you can hear, because the traffic's been diverted from the main road to Mosul, which is over there. But we haven't gone on it because Mosul's under the control of ISIS at the moment. But we're heading that way. We're going round Mosul for obvious reasons. This is a UN refugee camp for all the Yazidi people who've been driven out by ISIS. God knows when they'll get back to their homes.
6 million people live under ISIS control in Iraq and Syria. It's a tyrannical regime with a medieval attitude towards women, where beheadings and floggings are part of life. And people like the Yazidis are considered heathens and can be bought and sold as slaves.
Just makes you realize what an epic disaster Iraq has become. This was partly our work. We didn't create ISIS, but we created the situation that created ISIS. But these are the people paying the price for the epic mistakes of Western policy. Over there, Rojava, our goal. Lots of Kurds trying to get across in this corner of Syria something extraordinary going on. And whether it really is extraordinary, whether it is replicable, whether there are things that we can learn for the rest of the world, is what we're crossing the river for.
In the United Nations, where the future of Syria is being negotiated, Rojava doesn't even get discussed. The Syrian Kurds don't have a place at the table. But something is happening here. I intend to find out what it is.
And here we are in Syria. Hi, how are you? I'm Khan. Nice to meet you. Hi, hi. Spas. We've been met by the YPG, which is the Kurdish militia, the Kurdish People's Army, which has been fighting ISIS here in Syria.
The democratic experiment in Rojava came to life in 2012, when large parts of the Assad regime collapsed in Syria. Can the principles of anarchism, no hierarchy, decisions made by the people, no state, really be operating here?
كو رجيم جي قال لك دولتي كود خوازن دز دريجي ناوا سوري بكن وقلا برا هبدن يعني شركي ناف خوي طائفي مذهبي ودرخن بيش جبوية كي سياستا كو ما بين مجاري دا مشان فرجيو خقرت يعني هري ما تنيد سوري دا شري طائفي بيش نكتيا شري ناف خوي بيش نكتيا هري ممنا وهري مما برنجيا يعني عرب هيا مسيحي هيا كرد هيا جيكو هركس دكاري بو تدخي مشكلة درخي بتكوشينا ما السياسي مريل بيشيا في مشكلة قرت ام يروب هافرا كارك دكر.
This is a communal assembly where the villagers meet to decide their local affairs.
دهم كركي خوا صعاب كريا والله هبال أب حراقة ومحمود قافناكن نهام شاسر تختور بجنا مزاروكي من خوش دكابن بما حراقان زيكون أم دبي دهم كركي خوا صعاب كريا والله آخر نفس جبا حراقة هبال أب حراقة ومحمود قافناكن
All the villagers take part, men and women, there are Arabs and Assyrians, and they're allowed to speak first to make sure that non-Kurdish minorities are given a voice. Men and women sit separately, a practice that is part of Kurdish society. But women have a strong voice in the discussions.
So this is self-government in action, and here is the level that matters in Rojava. Decisions for here are taken for here. Decisions that affect here as much as possible are made here. And if decisions need to go to a higher level, then they'll go up to the next level of the legislative assembly. But as far as possible, decisions about things that matter here are made in that room right there.
Decisions that can't be made locally are made here at the Regional Assembly.
نقطة الجميع أهميتها كبيرة قلق مثلا هي خاصة بيبيشن أكيد تستري هلا بارك طبعاً إذا كنت أفخارها قناعة إيرو أمتد أفخارها بشيرة قرش مثلا قناعة بليل قرش بيها كل شيء قرش أبا إيرو قناعة شو بيستر تستخرج أبا على الأقل هذه زين ديمقراطي سيستم ديمقراطي أو دولة ديمقراطي هي بيها ما أمر بين مثلا يعني قال لك بعين الاعتبار بقرأ.
After watching a debate, I met some of the representatives.
يضم المجلس التشريعي من جميع المكونات نقلنا 101 ومن أساس المجلس التشريعي تمثيل المرأة هي 40%. هذا موجود بالمجلس التشريعي. وطبعا نقلنا جميع المكونات من عرب وسوريان وأكراد وتركمان وأرمن.
يعني براستي إما أز ديفيجن يعني أز كعرب دريف بري أز خنا بينهم كعرب أم قش يكن يعني تجار مخاليط يعني أز خد بينهم كرد سوريان ديرة بري أم يكن ديرة بري.
Do you feel as a young person that your ideas are taken seriously in the assembly?
First time it was hard on us.
Yeah.
Because it was the first time that we have this young age in the parliament.
Yeah.
And everybody was new on here, especially as a young woman. They see your ideas, they see how we work in the parliament. They take our ideas seriously and they believe in it. Here we are trying to build a system for the whole world to take ideas from us.
I've been in a lot of crappy chambers where you see people sitting like this Security Council, Parliament, blah, blah, blah. This one, although it's a bit shabby, it's kind of the best. And you could almost make a kind of inverse paradigm that the shabbier the collective chamber, the better the democracy. The more ornate and gilded, the more jaded the democracy, the less representative. Some age-old local practices of reconciliation fit well with anarchist philosophy in Rojava, and it doesn't involve the state. Where we're heading is to a reconciliation lunch between two families. This is an example of the way that the justice system here works, because rather than going to court, these two families have been encouraged to have consultations and negotiations between each other. Hi. Take my shoes off. The reason for this event was that a man had been accidentally shot and killed. Both families have already come together to settle the matter and agree compensation. Now the perpetrator's family is hosting a meal to show that they're sorry. There's an obvious tension here between the established culture and more egalitarian political ideals. The women are nowhere to be seen.
بلكي الباخ ودي الباوة نمازم أما البامة قلكي مازم شما مازم بو جبر قدش كي فوضى شيء ريك نبراب سبب فوضى أف مشكلة مازن قهات سريمة أم وبي جماعتي أبتشتايها سريمة
Is what's happened here satisfactory for the family?
ما ندخل كاس ما ندخل كاس ناخذ مليش كيف كاس ناخذ تعديل ل مليش كيف تشوش كحيوان كيش بس كذا وش كناش تجمني خرج ناخذ تبقى تجمني ما مظن وتنقول توبات لي استلمت شيء قدر امكانه وين انا وش ما مجبور تكون
There's a real sense of having arrived somewhere that's very special for me. Books. It's like, you know, for anarchists, this is like Republican Spain
during the Civil War. This is our Ithaca.
Anarchism in Spain was crushed by Stalin. Today in Rojava, it faces another deadly threat.
Hello, thank you.
اگر روشا حالي حاضر نهاون ببرسل سينوري ملقل داعش سينوري عراقي ام بقرن حتى باشوري باجاري كوباني باجاروكي سريني بتايبتي نيزي 400 كيلومتر درجه هي سينوري ملقل داعش هي روشا روش افاجي بلكي هونجي كيما كي دشوبين يعني عندنا امبارغويه كده هر دارينا سينور قلبيه تجاريه تركيا تجاريه باشوري كردستان با امبارغويه كي ايكونومي برمزن هي ويجي ريفابرنا شر ومشاندنا شر پیدا کرنا در فتن جبوی شر آستانگی پرمزین جبوی مدارشینا بنف خطي الصور حمي داعش يزر يمن.
Yellow is YPG and red is ISIS.
Yeah, red is ISIS.
This is where color blindness doesn't help.
Yeah. تواهي هرمين جو قدسته يبقى ده كنترول دكان سرانسري سوريا.
This is where we are.
Yeah.
Barak.
أورتانا وداعش عندك كافنجري نقطة هري نزي كيما أبايا 8 كيلومتر.
We're 8 kilometers from the Daesh, from ISIS front lines. Nobody has a rank in the YPG. They just have teams. This being a non-hierarchical society based on anarchist philosophy, but for a non-hierarchical army, they seem to have done pretty well.
وانا همي جاوينا جي سلاحانه وجي قرناصانه او مدرسه مكتب بري حمله ما يداوي ما تجاره قدر دس تجاره كدس لجبهه النصر دبو وجاره كدس داعش تجاره بري ما ما
Totally flattened. Shooting from up here, obviously. I'm not surprised civilians haven't wanted to come back here.
The YPG is the most effective ground force in the war against ISIS. It controls about 30,000 square kilometers of territory, an area the size of Belgium, with some support from American airstrikes.
Hi. Don't know, is it okay to shake hands? Yes. Hi. Greetings. Sparse. Sparse. Sparse. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. So this is the tip of the spear of the fight against ISIS. They're also young. So is ISIS in those houses there? What, they come out in the evening?
Yes.
Like rabbits? So are they on that hill over there as well?
Isn't
it the same for us though? I mean, don't they, if you appear at the parapet here, don't they take a pot shot?
The fighters told me that ISIS don't like attacking their part of the front line because they think they won't go to paradise if they're killed by a woman.
I know what you're fighting against, but what do you think you're fighting for?
اشتاجنا نكر راشتا سلاحة يادا ملاتا نكر بحراسنا خو بكت برجارة مسا سياسة تجي اللي دجي ما هاتا شغل عندن دقوت اشتاجنا نكر راشتا سلاحة إيرو أف راسية أف برخدانية بيجي بيجدا ديار كرنكو يعني أوجي تهسير ذهنيات دا سلابتارا يا اشتاجنا نكر راشتا سلاحة يادا ملاتا نكر بحراسنا خو بكت إيرو أف راسية أف برخدانية بيجي بيجدا ديار كرنكو أرمان جمع بحراسنا ولاتي ما آخامي زماني جبونا كو آخامي جرك أملي آزاد شان كان دسبكي جرك جن آزاد إجبرويج يعني أمجي لسر في فلسفة مش يعني أوجي تهسير ذهنيات دا سلابتارا يا طيبات هاني بريا 5000 سالة جهرتهم يعني ذهنيات أف دجواكا مدى هاتيرو نشكاندن
Both the female and male fighting units have taken heavy losses. In this cemetery, many of the graves are freshly dug. Like Orwell in Spain in the 1930s, I'm witnessing something extraordinary. The anarchist ideals I believe in are being put into practice here, and it works. Rojava shows the world there is a better way of doing things.
These people have built democracy, they have built the largest area of Syria that is stable and democratic. It's an inclusive democracy where Assyrians, Arabs and Kurds alike are given a fair crack of the whip. You know, what's not to support? They are fighting ISIS. They are sacrificing hundreds of lives. They are the people fighting the world's war against this horror. The problem is nobody's listening to them. And countries even like America, which is at war here, is not talking to them at a political level. The military have contacts with the YPG, but at a political level they're not talking, and that's a hell of a battle, and it's a battle, you know, I'm glad to take on. I have rarely felt more solidarity with a cause than I feel with these people here. It sounds romantic. You know, I'm not Lawrence of Arabia. I'm just a guy in an NGO struggling, doing what I know how to do, but this is what I'd like to do. This is for me the, you know, why I do what I do. And I am really, really, really, I'm really sad to leave, really sad.
It's like coming back out of the rabbit hole. What did I see? Was it real? Can it happen here? I'm greatly upset by it because I feel that they're fighting an epic fight. And here, you know, we're talking about a new iPhone and the fact that Apple had chosen to use a stylus on the iPad, and Donald Trump, a racist and a misogynist and a billionaire, is the center of political attention. So the bile rises, and we think we're better than them. You know, we think we have a superior system. I'm like, who's the idiot here? The basic claim of government is to provide order, but the evidence suggests growing disorder. they lose control, the response of governments will be more intrusion and more coercion. This is the future, unless we act. The opposite of government-imposed order is not chaos. There's a deeper order, concealed within human society, which relies not upon coercion, but cooperation and trust. Built not by governments or politicians, but by people who realize at last their own true power.
There is no hierarchy.
But this won't happen on its own. It's up to us.